Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's story goes back to 1855 and a young woman named Iron Dillard. She was a black girl, one fire simply couldn't burn. What unfolded around her had no clear reason, no logic, no record that ever added up. This story is a heavy one. So take a breath. Listen close. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with the city and country you're listening from. Your presence here ensures these stories stay alive and are never lost to time. Let's begin. In the winter of 1855, something happened on the Whitmore plantation in Colleton County, South Carolina, something people would whisper about for generations. A fire swallowed the main house and swept across the property in a way investigators later described as impossible. According to one witness, the flames moved with what looked like deliberate purpose. They consumed the overseer's quarters. They turned the cotton storehouse to ash. They erased the punishment shed from existence. Yet, strangely, the slave cabins were left entirely untouched. That night, 43 enslaved people disappeared. The plantation owner survived, but the next morning they found him wandering through the smoking ruins, his body marked with burn scars in the shape of letters. Initials, 37 sets of initials, seared into his skin. He never uttered another word. Not one coherent sentence for the rest of his days. When authorities questioned the remaining witnesses, they all gave the same account. They said the fire walked. They said it trailed a girl, a 12-year-old girl who passed through the flames like someone walking through rain. This is her story. This is the story of Esther Dillard, the one they named Iron, the girl fire couldn't harm. To grasp what happened that December night, we must go back 12 years. We must go back to the moment Esther was born. The Whitmore plantation covered 2,300 acres of low-country land, roughly 40 miles southwest of Charleston. In 1843, the year of Esther's birth, the plantation was home to 112 enslaved people and produced around 400 bales of cotton annually. Randolph Whitmore, the owner, was 41 and considered himself an enlightened master. He gave his slaves one rest day each week. He let them keep small garden plots behind their cabins. He even brought in a doctor twice a year to examine the workforce. In Randolph Whitmore's view, these small concessions made him a decent man. The people he owned knew better. Esther's mother was named Lily. She was 23 at the time of the birth and worked as a domestic servant in the main house. Lily had a reputation for being quiet and deliberate in her movements. She had learned early that survival meant going unnoticed. The less the white folks saw you, the safer you stayed. She kept her eyes down. She answered with the fewest words possible. She made herself small, helpful, and easy to overlook. For 6 years, that approach kept her alive. On the night Esther was born, a storm rolled across the low country. Witnesses later recalled lightning hitting the old oak near the slave quarters 3 times in a row. Mama Zora, the oldest woman on the property, was 78 that year, and she had delivered more babies than she could remember. She was the one who caught Esther as she came into the world, and she was the first to sense something different about this child. The baby didn't cry. Most newborns announce themselves with wailing. Esther simply opened her eyes and looked around the room as if taking inventory. Mama Zora would later say the child's eyes held an ancient soul, a soul that had witnessed things, a soul that carried memory. But what truly unsettled Mama Zora came moments after the birth. During the delivery, a candle on the windowsill had been knocked over. The flame caught the edge of the blanket Lily was lying on. In the commotion, nobody noticed until the fire had already begun spreading. Mama Zora grabbed the newborn to pull her away, but Esther had already rolled toward the flames. Her small hand reached out and made contact with the fire directly. Mama Zora screamed. She was sure the baby's hand would be ruined. Instead, she found the child completely unharmed. The fire had extinguished the moment Esther touched it. The baby's skin showed no burns, no redness, nothing. Mama Zora came from the Gullah people. Her grandmother had been brought to America from what is now Sierra Leone. She had been raised on tales of spirits and ancestors, of children born bearing gifts from the other side. She looked at baby Esther and recognized something. She told nobody what she had seen. Some things, she understood, were too dangerous to speak aloud. For the first 5 years of Esther's life, nothing out of the ordinary happened, or at least, nothing anyone took notice of. Lily raised her daughter in the small cabin she shared with 2 other women and their children. Esther was a quiet child, much like her mother. She watched more than she talked. She listened more than she asked. The other children on the plantation thought she was odd. She would sit for hours gazing at cooking fires, at candles, at the lanterns outside the overseer's office. Fire seemed to captivate her in a way that made grown-ups uneasy. When Esther turned 5, an event occurred that altered everything. It was August of 1848. The summer had been brutal, with temperatures topping 100 degrees for weeks. The slave cabins had poor ventilation, built with gaps that let in winter cold but did nothing to ease summer heat. On the night of August 17th, a cooking fire that hadn't been fully put out flared up inside one of the cabins. The flames raced through the dry timber quickly. 7 people were asleep inside, among them Esther and her mother. Lily woke to the smell of smoke. The cabin was already thick with it, black and suffocating. She could hear screams from the other families. She reached for Esther, but her daughter wasn't beside her. In the confusion and darkness, Lily couldn't find her child. She had no choice but to flee the burning building, convinced her daughter was gone. The cabin burned for nearly an hour. When the flames finally died down, the enslaved community gathered around the smoking wreckage to grieve. 6 people had escaped. 1 was missing. Little Esther, age 5, was believed to be dead. Then something impossible occurred. The ashes stirred. A small figure sat up in the middle of the ruins. Esther stood up, her clothes burned away, but her body was untouched. She was coated in soot yet showed no burns, no blisters, no injuries whatsoever. She walked out of the ashes toward her mother, who dropped to her knees in shock. The witnesses didn't know what to make of what they'd seen. Some thought it was a miracle from God. Others believed it was the devil's work. Mama Zora stayed silent, but she watched the child with fresh intensity. Word reached Randolph Whitmore by morning. The plantation owner came to examine the girl himself. He inspected her skin, searching for any sign of burns or deception. He found nothing. The child stood before him, small and quiet, holding his gaze in a way enslaved children were taught never to do. Whitmore was a man of practicality. He didn't put stock in miracles or devils. He believed in science, reason, and the natural order. What he had heard was impossible, which meant there had to be an explanation. The child must have escaped before the fire spread. The witnesses must have been confused. The story must have grown in the retelling. But something about the girl unsettled him. The way she looked at him, the steadiness in her eyes. In that moment, he made a choice that would define the next 7 years of Esther's life. He decided to test her. The first test took place that same day. Whitmore ordered a small fire built in the yard outside the slave quarters. He instructed his overseer, a man named Thomas Garrett, to bring the girl forward. Lily screamed and pleaded, but she was held back. Whitmore told the child to put her hand in the fire. Esther looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and placed both hands directly into the flames. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She kept her hands in the fire for nearly a minute while everyone watched in stunned silence. When she pulled them out, her palms weren't even warm to the touch. Whitmore's practical mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. He would spend the next 7 years trying to understand it. He would fail. From that day forward, Randolph Whitmore became fixated on the girl. He gave her a new name, Iron. It was intended as mockery, a reference to the folk belief that iron warded off evil spirits. If the devil was shielding this child, Whitmore reasoned, maybe iron could break whatever hold she was under. The name stuck. The enslaved community adopted it as well, though for different reasons. To them, iron wasn't an insult. It stood for strength. A reminder that something powerful lived among them, something even the master couldn't break. The tests went on. Whitmore subjected Iron to increasingly cruel experiments over the following years. He made her hold hot coals. He made her touch branding irons fresh from the forge. He once had her locked in the smokehouse for 3 days, surrounded by controlled fires. Each time, Iron came out unharmed. Each time, Whitmore's frustration deepened. What bothered him most wasn't the girl's immunity to fire, it was her manner. She never wept. She never pleaded. She simply endured, watching him with those steady eyes that seemed to see right through him. Sometimes, after a particularly harsh test, Whitmore would jolt awake in the middle of the night, convinced the girl was standing at the foot of his bed. She never was, but the feeling persisted. The enslaved community formed their own ideas about Iron. Some believed she was protected by African spirits. Others thought she was a sign from God that deliverance was coming. A few, mostly those who had converted to Christianity and set aside the old ways, thought she was dangerous and best avoided. But almost everyone agreed on one point: there was something about this child that defied understanding. Mama Zora kept her thoughts to herself, but on Iron's 7th birthday, she summoned the girl to her cabin and began to teach her. Mama Zora was the keeper of memory on the Whitmore plantation. She held the old stories, the ones handed down from generation to generation, all the way back to Africa. Most of the younger people had forgotten these stories or dismissed them as superstition. But Mama Zora knew that stories were more than entertainment. They were survival. They were identity. They were a bridge to a past that slavery tried to wipe out. She told Iron about Ogun. In the Yoruba tradition, Ogun was the spirit of iron and fire, the divine blacksmith who forged paths through the wilderness. He was a warrior spirit, fierce and unyielding, connected to justice and the defense of the oppressed. Mama Zora explained that sometimes, in times of deep suffering, Ogun would bestow his blessing on certain children. These children would be marked by fire. They would be immune to its harm because they carried its power inside them. Iron listened to these stories without comment. She didn't know whether to believe them, but she recognized something in them that rang true. She had always known she was different. Now she was beginning to understand why. Mama Zora also taught her something practical: how to control it. The old woman had watched Iron closely over the years. She had noticed the girl's power wasn't merely passive immunity. It was active, even if Iron didn't realize it. Small fires would die out when Iron became calm. They would surge when she grew angry or scared. The gift was linked to her emotions, to her will. Mama Zora believed it could be cultivated. The training took place in secret, late at night when the plantation slept. Mama Zora would light a small candle and have Iron practice directing the flame with her mind. At first, nothing happened. But over weeks and months, Iron began to sense something, a connection, a thread between herself and the fire as real as a rope in her hands. She learned to make the flame grow. She learned to make it shrink. She learned to shift it, form it, bend it to her will. She told nobody what she was learning, not even her mother. Some things, Mama Zora warned, were too risky to reveal. If the master ever discovered that Iron could not only survive fire but command it, there was no telling what he might do. The years passed. Iron grew from a child into a young girl, and the plantation kept to its brutal rhythm. Cotton was sown in spring, tended through summer, gathered in fall. The enslaved worked from dawn to dusk, their existence measured in pounds of cotton picked and bales produced. The system was built to extract maximum labor while spending the least on those who provided it. It was efficient. It was profitable. It was evil. Iron began working in the fields at age 8. By 10, she was expected to pick 50 pounds of cotton a day. By 12, that quota had increased to 100 pounds. The labor was punishing, the conditions hazardous. Cotton plants had sharp edges that cut hands and arms. The South Carolina sun was unforgiving. Dehydration, heatstroke, and exhaustion claimed lives each summer. But through it all, Iron persevered. She gained a reputation as a reliable worker, not the fastest, but always meeting her quota. She kept to herself, spoke little, watched everything. The other enslaved people respected her but also felt a touch of fear. They hadn't forgotten what she was, what she could do. Thomas Garrett, the overseer, especially disliked Iron. He was a violent man who took pleasure in punishment, and Iron's resistance to certain forms of discipline drove him mad. He couldn't burn her. When he tried to whip her, the wounds would heal by morning, leaving no trace. It was as if her body refused any permanent mark. Garrett took this as defiance. He looked for other ways to hurt her. When Iron was 11, Garrett found her weakness. He couldn't harm Iron directly, but he could harm those she loved. One evening, Garrett caught Iron talking with a boy named Samuel. They were just talking, sharing a few moments of rest after the day's work. But Garrett claimed they were plotting something. He dragged Samuel to the punishment post and whipped him bloody while Iron was forced to watch. The message was unmistakable: she might be untouchable, but the people around her were not. From that day forward, Iron understood that her gift was also a weight. Her immunity shielded only her. Everyone she cared about stayed vulnerable. This understanding would steer every decision she made in the years ahead. By 1855, the world beyond the Whitmore plantation was shifting. But she had survived, and she had kept her daughter alive. In the brutal arithmetic of slavery, that counted as success. In the spring of that year, something happened that set the final events in motion. The plantation's head cook, a woman named Bessie, was caught hiding food. She had been taking small amounts from the kitchen to feed her grandson, a sickly boy who wasn't getting enough to eat. By any reasonable measure, it was a minor theft. But Randolph Whitmore had no tolerance for theft of any kind. He decided to make an example of her. Bessie was given 50 lashes. She was 62 years old. She didn't survive. The enslaved community mourned in silence. They had no power to protest, no path to justice. But the anger and grief rippled through the quarters, adding to years of accumulated pain. Iron felt it deeply. Bessie had been kind to her as a child, slipping her extra food when nobody was looking, telling her stories about her grandmother in Africa. Now she was dead, killed for feeding a hungry child. That night, Iron couldn't sleep. She lay in her cabin, staring at the ceiling, and felt something shifting inside her. The fire that lived within her, the one she had learned to control and contain, was pressing against its boundaries. It wanted out. It wanted to burn. Mama Zora came to her. The old woman was 89 now, frail and nearly blind, but she still perceived things. She could still sense when the spirits were stirring. She told Iron the time was approaching. She didn't know exactly when or how, but she could feel it. A reckoning was near. Iron would have to decide what kind of person she wanted to be. She could use her gift for destruction, burning everything and everyone who had hurt her. Or she could use it for something greater, use it to rescue her people. Iron didn't answer. She wasn't ready to make that choice. Not yet. 2 weeks later, her mother was accused of theft. The accusation came from Cornelius, the plantation's black overseer. Cornelius occupied a complicated place in the Whitmore plantation's order. He was an enslaved man given authority over other enslaved people. He carried a whip. He reported violations to the master. He kept order. In exchange, he received better food, better housing, and some protection from the worst cruelties. Many of the other enslaved people despised him. They saw him as a sellout, a man who had traded his soul for scraps from the master's table. Cornelius claimed he had seen Lily stealing flour from the kitchen storehouse. The evidence was thin. No flour was found in Lily's possession. But Randolph Whitmore trusted his black overseer. It was convenient to have a black man enforce discipline on black bodies. It sowed division among the enslaved population. It made them distrust each other. It was a tactic as old as slavery itself. Whitmore decided Lily would be sold, not whipped or punished on the plantation, but sold to a trader who would take her to the Mississippi cotton fields. This was in many ways a fate worse than death. The Mississippi plantations were infamous for their brutality. Life expectancy for enslaved people there was measured in single-digit years. And Lily would be torn from her daughter forever. The sale was scheduled for June 10, 1855. Iron learned of the decision the night before. She found her mother in their cabin packing the few belongings she was allowed to take. Lily wasn't crying. She had moved past tears into a kind of numb resignation. This was the reality of their existence. Families were split apart. Mothers were ripped from children. Love was a weakness because it gave the masters one more weapon to wield against you. Iron refused to accept it. For the first time in her life, she felt the full force of her gift rising within her. It wasn't a gentle warmth but a roaring furnace demanding release. She could reduce the entire plantation to cinders. She could kill Whitmore and Garrett and everyone who had made their lives a living nightmare. She could have her vengeance. But Mama Zora's words echoed in her mind. Destruction was easy. Building something better was hard. If she simply burned everything, what would become of the 100 other enslaved people on this property? What would become of the children? What would become of the old and sick who couldn't flee? Her revenge would consume them along with her enemies. She made a decision. She wouldn't just destroy, she would set people free. That night, Iron began to plan. She went first to Solomon, the plantation blacksmith. Solomon was 53 and had lived on the Whitmore plantation for 30 years. He was skilled at his trade, valuable enough that Whitmore had never considered selling him. But Solomon carried deep wounds. 15 years earlier, his wife and 2 sons had been sold to cover Whitmore's gambling debts. He had never recovered from that loss. He did his work mechanically, spoke to no one, and waited for death. Iron found him in the forge, working late on a set of horseshoes. She told him what she was planning. She told him about her gift. She showed him, creating a flame in her palm and letting it dance between her fingers. Solomon watched without expression. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he asked her one question: could she really get people out, not just herself, but everyone who wanted to go? Iron told him the truth. She didn't know. But she was going to try. Solomon nodded slowly. For the first time in 15 years, something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like hope. He would help her. He would forge what they needed: keys, tools, weapons if necessary. But he warned her about something, about Cornelius. The black overseer was dangerous, Solomon said. Not because he was strong or clever, but because he was desperate. He had built his whole identity around his position. If the slaves escaped, if the plantation fell, Cornelius would lose everything. He would fight to preserve the system that gave him power, even though that system enslaved him too. Iron thanked Solomon for the warning. But she had already known about Cornelius. She had known for years. What she didn't know yet was the truth about his connection to her. The planning took time. Iron couldn't simply announce her intentions. She had to figure out who would be willing to run and who might betray them. She had to map escape routes. She had to coordinate timing. And she had to keep her mother from being sold while she put everything in place. The last part proved impossible. On June 10th, as scheduled, a slave trader arrived at the Whitmore plantation. His name was Marcus Webb, and he operated throughout the Deep South, buying and selling human beings like livestock. He had come for Lily and 3 other enslaved people Whitmore had decided to sell. Iron watched from the fields as her mother was led to the wagon. Lily looked back once, found her daughter in the crowd, and held her gaze. No words were spoken, none were needed. In that look was everything: love, grief, a desperate hope that her daughter would survive. Then Lily was loaded into the wagon, and the wagon pulled away, and Iron's mother vanished down the road toward Mississippi. Iron stood frozen. The fire inside her surged and screamed. She could feel it trying to break free, trying to reach out and stop the wagon, trying to burn everything in its path. It took every ounce of control she had to hold it back. She couldn't act now. Not in daylight, surrounded by overseers with guns. She would die and save nobody. That night, something changed in Iron. The girl who had endured 7 years of tests, who had watched and waited and learned to restrain herself, was gone. In her place was something harder, something colder, something that had made a decision. She wouldn't just escape. She wouldn't just liberate her people. She would make Randolph Whitmore pay for every life he had destroyed. She would make him understand exactly what he had done. And she would do it in a way he would never forget. The next morning, Iron went to Mama Zora one last time. The old woman was dying. She had held on for years, sustained by sheer will and the knowledge that she had one more task to complete. Now, with Iron standing before her, she could feel that task nearing its end. She told Iron the final piece of the story, the part she had kept back for 12 years. On the night Iron was born, during that terrible storm, Mama Zora had witnessed something. When the lightning struck the oak tree 3 times, she had seen a figure standing beneath it. A figure made of flame, shaped like a man, but burning with impossible intensity. The figure had looked toward the cabin where Lily was giving birth. Then it had nodded once, as if confirming something, and then vanished. Mama Zora believed she had seen Ogun himself. The spirit of iron and fire, the warrior who clears paths, come to witness the birth of one of his children. He had marked Iron for a purpose, not just survival, not just personal power, but liberation. Iron listened to the old woman's words. She didn't know if she believed in Ogun. She didn't know if she believed in anything beyond the reality of her own experience. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was going to free her people. She was going to burn down the system that enslaved them. And she was going to find her mother, no matter how long it took. Mama Zora smiled. She reached out and touched Iron's face with her withered hand. She told Iron that she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. She had been brought to this plantation 60 years ago, stolen from her family in Africa, and she had survived everything they threw at her. She had survived because she knew deep in her bones that someone was coming, someone who would make things right. Now that someone was here, Mama Zora could finally rest. She died that night peacefully, a smile on her face. The enslaved community buried her beneath the oak tree where Ogun had appeared. Iron stood at the grave as the sun rose and made a silent promise: she would honor Mama Zora's faith. She would honor her ancestors. She would become the warrior they had prayed for. The fire inside her burned steady and strong, waiting to be unleashed. December was 6 months away. Iron had work to do. The months between June and December of 1855 were the most intense of Iron's young life. She was 12 years old, a child by any normal measure. But there was nothing normal about her circumstances or her responsibilities. She was planning the largest escape in the history of Colleton County. She was preparing to challenge a system that had stood for 200 years. And she was doing it all while keeping up the appearance of an obedient slave. The first priority was recruitment. Iron needed to identify who would run and who could be trusted. This was dangerous work. One wrong choice, one person who decided to betray the group for favor with the master, and everyone would die. She started with the people she knew best, the women who had shared cabins with her mother, the children she had grown up with, the older workers who had shown her small kindnesses over the years. She approached each one carefully, testing their reactions before revealing anything specific. The responses varied. Some were eager, desperate for any chance at freedom. Others were terrified, convinced escape was impossible and trying would only make things worse. A few refused even to discuss it, too broken by years of abuse to imagine anything different. Iron didn't pressure anyone. She made her case simply and honestly. She told them about her gift. She demonstrated when necessary. She explained her plan in broad strokes. Then she let them decide. By September, she had 43 confirmed participants, men, women, and children, ranging in age from 6 to 72. It was more than she had hoped for. It was also more than she had planned for. Moving that many people without detection would be extraordinarily difficult. The second priority was the route. Iron studied the geography of the area obsessively. She learned which roads were patrolled and when. She identified rivers and swamps that could provide cover. She located the stations of the Underground Railroad, the secret network of safe houses that helped escaped slaves reach the north. The closest reliable station was in Georgetown, about 50 miles northeast of the plantation. A free black family named the Washingtons operated out of their home there, sheltering runaways and connecting them with guides who could take them further north. If Iron could get her group to Georgetown, they would have a chance. But 50 miles was a long way to travel on foot, especially with children and elderly people. They would need supplies, rest stops, contingency plans. Iron worked through the details methodically, trying to anticipate every problem. The third priority was dealing with Cornelius. The black overseer had become more aggressive since Lily's sale. He seemed to sense something changing among the enslaved population. He watched Iron with particular intensity, looking for evidence of whatever he suspected. Iron avoided him as much as possible, but on a plantation, complete avoidance was impossible. In October, Cornelius confronted her. He found her alone near the edge of the cotton fields during the brief break between afternoon work and evening meal. He told her he knew she was planning something. He didn't know what, but he could feel it. The air on the plantation felt different. People were whispering. He was going to find out what was happening, and when he did, there would be consequences. Iron looked at him steadily. She asked why he cared. He was enslaved just like them. Whitmore could sell him tomorrow if he wanted. All his power, all his privilege could be taken away in an instant. Why did he fight so hard to protect a system that saw him as property? Cornelius's face twisted with something between anger and pain. He told her she didn't understand. He told her survival was all that mattered. The strong survived by any means necessary. The weak were crushed. That was the way of the world. And no amount of wishful thinking would change it. Iron said nothing. She just looked at him with those steady eyes that had unnerved Randolph Whitmore for 7 years. After a long moment, Cornelius turned and walked away. But their conversation wasn't over. A week later, Iron learned the truth about Cornelius, and it changed everything. Solomon the blacksmith was the one who told her. He had debated whether to share this information. It wasn't his secret to tell, but he had decided Iron deserved to know the truth before she made her final plans. Cornelius was her father. 13 years ago, before Cornelius had become overseer, he and Lily had been involved. It wasn't a romance was almost impossible under slavery. But they had found comfort in each other, two young people trying to survive an inhuman system. When Lily became pregnant, Cornelius made a choice. He distanced himself from her. He threw himself into earning the master's trust. He climbed the brutal hierarchy of the plantation until he reached the position of overseer. He did it, Solomon said, because he was terrified. He thought that by gaining power, he could protect himself. Maybe he even thought he could protect his child from a distance. But the price of that power was his soul. He became the thing he had feared, an enforcer of the very system that enslaved him. Iron absorbed this information in silence. She thought about all the times Cornelius had watched her with that strange intensity. She had assumed it was suspicion or hostility. Now she understood it was something more complicated. Guilt, shame, a desperate, twisted kind of love poisoned by fear. It didn't change her plans. Cornelius had made his choices. He had helped sell her mother. He had whipped and brutalized her people for years. Whatever might have been possible between them, whatever relationship they might have had, was buried under mountains of suffering. She wouldn't forgive him. She wouldn't save him. But she wouldn't kill him either, not unless he gave her no choice. November arrived, and with it the harvest. The cotton had to be picked, processed, and baled for market. The work was exhausting, 16-hour days that left the enslaved workers barely able to stand. Iron pushed through it, conserving her strength for what was coming. She had chosen the date, December 17, 1855. It was a Saturday, which meant the enslaved population would have Sunday to rest, giving them extra hours before their absence was noticed. It was also the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. More darkness meant more time to travel. In the final weeks, Iron refined her plan. The escape would begin at midnight. She would create a distraction, using her gift to start fires in strategic locations around the plantation. While the overseers and Whitmore dealt with the chaos, the escapees would gather at a predetermined point near the northern edge of the property. From there, they would move quickly toward Georgetown. Iron would cover their retreat. She would stay behind, managing the fires, ensuring no one could follow. When the group was safely away, she would catch up. Her immunity to fire meant she could move through burning areas that would stop any pursuer. But before she left, she had one final task. Randolph Whitmore was going to learn what it felt like to be marked, to be branded, to carry permanent reminders of his sins on his flesh. Iron had planned this part carefully. She had memorized the names of every person Whitmore had sold, every family he had separated, every life he had destroyed. 37 people, 37 sets of initials. They would be burned into his skin forever. It wasn't murder. Whitmore would survive, at least physically, but he would never forget what he had done, and everyone who saw him would know he had been judged. The night of December 16th, Iron visited the grave beneath the oak tree one last time. She knelt in the cold grass and spoke to Mama Zora. She told her tomorrow was the day. She asked for her blessing and her guidance. She promised she wouldn't fail. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the oak. For just a moment, Iron thought she felt a hand on her shoulder. When she turned, no one was there, but she felt comforted nonetheless. She returned to her cabin and lay down to rest. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow she would either win her freedom or die trying. Tomorrow the Whitmore plantation would burn. December 17, 1855, began like any other winter day on the Whitmore plantation. The temperature hovered just above freezing when the morning bell rang at 5:30. The enslaved workers emerged from their cabins into the gray dawn, breath visible in the cold air, and made their way to their assigned tasks. Winter meant less field work but more labor in other areas, equipment to repair, buildings to maintain, livestock to tend. The plantation never truly rested. Iron moved through her morning routines with careful precision. She couldn't afford to do anything that might attract attention, not today. She worked in the kitchen garden, pulling the last of the winter vegetables, her hands steady despite the anticipation coursing through her body. Every few minutes, she glanced at the sky, tracking the sun's position, counting down the hours until darkness. The other conspirators were doing the same. Iron had given each of them specific instructions: act normal, do nothing unusual, stay calm. When the fires started, move quickly to the gathering point near the old mill at the northern edge of the property. Don't wait for anyone who isn't there. Don't look back. The hardest part was the children. There were 9 children among the 43 escapees, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Iron had debated whether to include them at all. Children were unpredictable, they might cry at the wrong moment, slow the group, give away their position. But she couldn't leave them behind. She couldn't ask parents to abandon their children, and she couldn't condemn another generation to grow up in chains. The youngest was a boy named Isaiah. He was 6, small for his age, with large, serious eyes that reminded Iron of herself at that age. Isaiah's mother, a woman named Ruth, had been one of the first to commit to the escape. She had told Iron she would rather die free than live another day as a slave. She wanted her son to know what freedom felt like, even if it was only for a few hours before they were caught. Iron had promised Ruth they wouldn't be caught. She intended to keep that promise. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Iron performed her tasks mechanically, her mind running through the plan again and again, looking for weaknesses she might have missed. She had prepared for many contingencies, weather, injuries, unexpected patrols. But she knew something would go wrong. Something always went wrong. The question was whether she could adapt quickly enough to survive it. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the winter sun began to set. By 5:30, full darkness had fallen. The enslaved workers returned to their cabins for the evening meal, a meager portion of cornmeal and salt pork that was never enough to satisfy hunger but was all they would receive until morning. Iron ate slowly, forcing herself to consume every bite. She would need her strength tonight. When she finished, she sat in the corner of her cabin and waited. The other occupants, 2 older women who weren't part of the escape, settled onto their pallets and fell asleep. Iron remained motionless, listening to the sounds of the plantation settling into night. At 11:30, she rose silently and slipped out of the cabin. The night was cold and clear, a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate by. Iron moved through the slave quarters like a shadow, pausing at predetermined cabins to signal those who were waiting. One by one, small groups began making their way toward the gathering point. They moved in silence, staying low, avoiding the main paths where they might be spotted. Iron didn't join them immediately. She had other business first. She made her way to the main house, staying in the shadows, watching for movement. The overseer's cabin showed a dim light through the window, probably Thomas Garrett drinking himself to sleep, as he did most nights. The main house was dark except for a single lamp in Randolph Whitmore's study. The plantation owner often worked late, reviewing accounts and correspondence. Iron circled the house until she found the position she had scouted weeks earlier, a ground-floor window leading to a storage room. The window had a broken latch no one had bothered to repair. She eased it open and climbed inside. The storage room was filled with household supplies, linens, cleaning materials, spare